Former FIFA President Sepp Blatter yesterday backed calls for fans to quote-unquote stay away from FIFA World Cup matches in the United States.
It is not safe to go to America, not only during the World Cup. Any South African who had an intention to go to America, this is not the...
Sepp Blatter, the former president of FIFA, has stepped into the noise with a blunt warning. Fans should stay away from World Cup matches in the United States. Not be cautious, not plan well, stay away. His argument is simple and sharp. America isn't safe right now, and not only during the World Cup. He went as far as saying that for South Africans, this is not the time to travel there at all, because it is dangerous. Now, you can agree with him or think he's exaggerating, but the bigger story isn't even his quote. The bigger story is what happens if African nations decide they're done playing nice. Because imagine this. What if African countries walked away from the 2026 World Cup not because of a formal travel ban, not because of dramatic diplomatic meltdown, but because they ran the numbers and realized something cold and strategic? That absence can sometimes be more powerful than attendance. What if the most effective move isn't showing up to compete, but refusing to be part of the show? That's where this starts to get real. The 2026 tournament is projected to generate about $8.9 billion. That's not pocket change. That's a financial mountain built on the assumption that the World Cup will deliver what people paid for. The biggest teams, the biggest players, the biggest storylines, and a genuinely global competition that feels complete. And here's the twist. Africa isn't a side character in that plan anymore. For the first time in World Cup history, 9 African nations have qualified. That's a massive jump from the old 5 spots. FIFA expanded the tournament to 48 teams, and Africa was the biggest beneficiary. On paper, it looks like a win. More representation, more opportunities, more visibility, more pride. But at the exact moment Africa got more seats at the table, some influential voices across the continent started asking a dangerous question. Is it worth sitting down for this particular tournament? South African politician Julius Malema called for withdrawal, comparing parts of the current U.S. political climate to apartheid-era South Africa. Sepp Blatter urged fans to stay away. Mark Pieth, the Swiss lawyer who chaired FIFA's Independent Governance Committee, echoed the same idea. These aren't random people chasing attention. These are people who understand how FIFA works, politically and financially. And they're openly questioning whether Africa should participate. So let's strip away the emotions and the headlines for a second and deal with the chessboard. If Africa coordinates a boycott, what does FIFA actually lose? What does Africa actually risk? And in a tournament driven by billions, who really has leverage? 2026 is not like past World Cups, and the reason is money, timing, and contracts that are already locked in. FIFA expects this World Cup to be its biggest commercial haul ever. There are 3 main engines behind that. The expansion to 48 teams, hosting across 16 cities in North America, and a massive broadcasting market estimated at around $3.92 billion. Broadcasting is FIFA's largest revenue stream, making up roughly 44% of total income. Sponsors and marketing rights add about $2.69 billion more. Ticketing and hospitality contribute another $3.097 billion. Put it together, and you start to see why FIFA needs the tournament to feel complete. Because broadcasters don't pay billions for a watered-down product, sponsors don't sign deals for a World Cup that looks politically fractured. Fans don't travel and buy tickets for a tournament that suddenly feels like it's missing a whole section of the football world. Now, look at Africa's qualified teams, and you'll understand why this isn't symbolic fluff. Morocco aren't just participants. They reached the semifinals in 2022 and made history as the first African team to go that far. Senegal have serious star power and pedigree. Egypt come with Mohamed Salah, one of the most recognizable and marketable footballers on earth. Algeria bring a strong football identity and big support. Ivory Coast have depth, talent, and tournament pedigree. And then you've got other nations with players spread across the Premier League, La Liga, Serie A, and the Bundesliga. These are not filler teams. These are squads people actually tune in to watch. So if all 9 African teams withdraw together, FIFA doesn't just lose 9 flags on a graphic. They lose nearly 20% of the tournament field. They lose a huge chunk of competitive quality. They lose storylines. They lose matchups. They lose some of the very players and teams that make the World Cup feel global rather than regional. And that's where the pressure gets painful. You can't just quietly replace 9 teams and pretend nothing happened. You can't swap in backups and claim the tournament is unchanged. The entire competitive balance shifts. The narrative changes. The product that broadcasters sold to advertisers suddenly isn't the same product. And that brings us to timing, which is the real weapon here. The World Cup begins on June 11th, 2026. That means schedules are set, broadcast plans are built, sponsor activations are booked, ticket sales and hospitality packages are already planned around specific expectations. This isn't a flexible event. It's a machine already moving at full speed. So, if Africa announces a coordinated boycott in that window, FIFA can't respond calmly. They can't renegotiate every media deal. They can't fix the optics with a press conference. They can't rebuild the tournament without chaos. That's why this threat, if credible, becomes a genuine crisis. And before we go further, let's be honest. A boycott isn't free, not even close. Each qualified team is set to receive at least $10.5 million just for participating, plus more, depending on performance. Across 9 teams, that's roughly $94.5 million in guaranteed participation money. For some federations, that cash is the difference between stable development and financial struggle. For smaller nations qualifying for the first time, that money can be transformative, funding infrastructure, coaching, grassroots programs, and federation operations. Then there's the players. For African players, especially those based in Europe, the World Cup isn't just another tournament. It's the biggest stage on earth. For a star like Mohamed Salah, 2026 could be one of the last real chances to play a World Cup at his peak level. For younger players, it can be the moment that changes careers, contracts, sponsorships, and legacy. A boycott asks them to sacrifice the biggest spotlight for a political statement they may not personally support, even if they understand the wider strategy. And then there's FIFA's rulebook. FIFA can punish withdrawals with financial penalties and potential exclusions from future competitions. That is not theoretical. FIFA has enforcement tools and has used them before. So if Africa boycotts 2026, the fear is not just losing money in 2026, it's risking consequences in 2030, 2034, and beyond. That's why the calculation is brutal. Short-term leverage and symbolism versus long-term risk. But here's the catch that decides everything. Coordination. A boycott only becomes a sledgehammer if all 9 teams move together. If Morocco, Senegal, and Egypt pull out but other African teams stay in, the threat loses power fast. FIFA can survive 3 withdrawals. 9 is a different story. Coordinating 9 sovereign nations is extremely difficult. Every country has its own politics, relationships, and incentives. Morocco has strong economic ties with the United States. Egypt receives major U.S. military aid. South Africa's government hasn't officially backed Malema's call. Other nations have their own diplomatic calculations. For a unified boycott to work, you'd need alignment at multiple levels: governments, football associations, and ideally support from bodies like the African Union and CAF. It's possible, but it's hard. And even if Africa pulls off perfect coordination, there's another uncomfortable truth. They may be standing alone. Europe isn't boycotting. South America isn't boycotting. Big football powers aren't walking away. Some officials in Europe have already rejected boycott calls. That means Africa could carry most of the cost, while FIFA still runs the tournament, just with diminished legitimacy and a weakened product. So the impact would be real, but the question becomes, is it real enough? History gives a clue, and it cuts both ways. In 1976, many African nations boycotted the Montreal Olympics in protest of New Zealand's sporting ties with apartheid South Africa. The boycott became part of a wider pressure campaign against apartheid, and, in the long run, it helped shape global resistance. But it also came with a price. Athletes lost opportunities, countries lost visibility, and the Olympics still went on without them. That's the same structure here. Accept short-term loss for a long-term strategic goal, and hope the world recognizes the moral and political argument behind the sacrifice. Now, bring it back to 2026. FIFA has built its most commercially ambitious World Cup ever on the idea that expansion means more inclusion, more global buy-in, and a stronger product. Africa's 9 teams are a major part of that product, not just as participants, but as competitive threats, fan favorites, and star-driven narratives. So Africa's leverage is real, but only if it becomes credible. FIFA will likely bet that it won't. FIFA will hope coordination breaks down, that a few federations decide the money is too important, that players push back, that governments don't want diplomatic tension, that the boycott stays as talk. And that's why the next few months matter so much. Because once the draw is done and the machinery is too far down the track, the window for maximum leverage starts closing. What options does FIFA even have if this threat grows?